are living in a time when the love of God has practically disappeared from the face of the earth. Perhaps it's not surprising that the Roman Catholic Church finds herself in possibly the greatest crisis of her history. I'm Julius Smetona. This is what Catholics believe.
Well, if you're a traditional Catholic of a certain age, you might just remember the young man in that episode. And if you do, you're in for a real treat today. If you don't, well, you're in for a great history lesson. Because Mr. Julius Smetona joins us today to discuss, among other things, his unique family background and his time hosting that show in the late 1980s and 1990s. Mr. Julius Smetona, when you see that clip of yourself all those years ago, giving that introduction as a young man, and what goes through your mind? What's your initial thoughts as you see that?
Very severe and fanatical individual. No, I remember that. I mean, it was a privilege to be affiliated with that. But let me tell you, when you're saying he was a host, there was much more than being a host. Who had to raise the money, organize all the people, prepare for the programs, construct the programs, pay the bills, respond to correspondence, have all that organized. It was brutal. I mean, we were volunteers, and I will mention some of the names of the people who were involved with that, because they didn't work for anything other than literally, and I know it might sound somewhat corny, the glory of God and the salvation of souls. That was their complete purpose in doing this. And they worked very hard, and they had to make sacrifices of time and effort and sleep and everything else to make this possible. But no, I remember that. And I think that it was there for a time, and it had a certain purpose to fulfill, and perhaps it fulfilled that purpose. And then that was it. Countries come and go, television programs come and go.
Well, we will get into the show for the rest of the episode later on, but as you mentioned, countries come and go. And I first want to bring up, because I don't know if many people know this, although they really should, your own family has played a very integral role, historically speaking, in the country of Lithuania.
My grandparents on my mother's side did not really play a significant role in the resurgence of the nation of Lithuania, but my grandparents on my father's side certainly did. My grandfather was Antanas Smetona, who was born in 1874 to a farming family. He was one of 9 children. Obviously, they were Catholics. It's not clear, to me at least, if he was just strictly descended from a serf family, or if he was a noble family who, as a result of revolting against Russians in the 1800s, was stripped of all their belongings and reduced to serfdom. He, I am told, walked to school barefoot. He was admitted to the diocesan seminary, but felt no great calling to the priesthood, and then studied law at the University of St. Petersburg, although the choice was really a practical matter because his interest was more in philosophy, language, linguistics, and so forth. He rejected Marxist and socialist ideas. He returned to Lithuania and promoted the cause of the Lithuanian nation. He studied under the great linguist who established essentially reestablished the Lithuanian language, named Jonas Jablonskis, and he had proliferated, books on Lithuanian grammar and such. Which, again, there was a period of Russification where Lithuanian culture and language were totally suppressed. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence in 1918. He was president from 1919 to 1920, and then, not for the first time, he was thrown in jail because he criticized the new government. And he had previously spent plenty of time in jail for political idealism. Then he became president again in 1926 and served as president to 1940 when the Bolsheviks invaded. His rule was characterized by remarkable prosperity, and part of that was due to the Minister of Finance, who was my great uncle, Joseph Tubelis. I was told that while the world GDP was in the 2% range during the 1930s, and this was the Great Depression as well.
Yes,
right? In Lithuania, it was like 170%. There was incredible infrastructure and so forth. Another thing that was interesting was that while my grandfather was very anti-communist, as my grandmother, and very anti-Nazi, he was very just and kind to the Jews, to the extent that his political opponents called him King of the Jews. And you have to remember Vilna, The most important, I believe, Jewish rabbinical seminary was located in Vilnius. And I think that the population, the Jewish population of Lithuania was something like 13%. How did
Now,
he
real
meet?
quick,
Go ahead.
real quick, Julius, was Lithuania an officially Catholic country? Did they have a concordat with the Vatican at all?
100%. You will get to that. He signed a concordat with Pope Pius XI. I'll jump right into that.
Okay.
And among other things, the concordat specified that all public schools would have compulsory Catholic religious education overseen by the local ordinary and paid for by the state. Every
Incredible.
diocese would have a seminary which was subsidized by the state. There was,
Amazing.
Catholic marriage. There was no divorce. There was no abortion. It was amazing. I'm not going to say it perfectly realized the Catholic ideal, but it was significant. And like I said, the people greeted themselves in the streets, all praise to Jesus and Mary, at least in the rural areas. Lithuanian independence was recognized de facto by the Vatican, I believe, in 1921, and de jure by 1923. My grandmother was from the Chodakowski family, or Chodakauskas. They were of noble lineage, and I think not only Polish Lithuanian nobility, there was also some German nobility, noble background there as well. And like many of the people from the upper classes, she looks a little bit like a Tartar there, but they didn't speak Lithuanian very well. And this was the period of the flowering of Lithuanian nationalism. So my grandfather, who was poor, was hired, but educated, was hired to be a tutor to the Chodakowski family. And then he ended up marrying my grandmother, who was 10 years younger than him.
Let me play a clip real quick, Julius, of one of your grandfather's speeches here.
Sure.
And it's really fascinating because it is at a sporting event, I believe. And there's a priest on hand giving a blessing. I want to make sure we can get this right here.
Lietuvos Respublikos prezidentas Antanas Smetona, lydimas aukštų pareigūnų, nuoširdžiai sveikinamas tautiniais drabužiais apsirėdžiusių lietuvaičių ir visuomenės, atvyksta atidaryti iškilmių. Dekanui Kapočiui pašventinus naujai pastatytą sporto salę, Respublikos prezidentas atidarė iškilmes. Pasiklausykime autentiškų prezidento Smetonos žodžių.
Man yra malonu pasveikinti šio kilnaus žaismo rengėjus, šeimininkus ir prašariečius. Ypatingai malonu šiems pasakyti. Sveiki, atvykę, mielieji užsienio svečiai. Laimingai viešėkite pas mus, kaip pas savi namie.
So the translation, I'm not sure, Julius, can you translate
I'll give
that?
you a little bit of a translation.
Yeah,
so what they did, they
great.
opened a new sport stadium or arena. The priest was blessing it, and my grandfather was welcoming those from abroad, and he welcomed them to be just as much as home as if they had never left their home. So that was what was going on.
Hey, thanks for watching this episode. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Florida Low Carb Direct Primary Care. In this age of big pharma, it's hard to find doctors who not only care about you, but who are also able to provide healthcare advice that actually works. Florida Low Carb understands that the human body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. Run by a devout traditional Catholic who recognizes the social kingship of Christ, Florida Low Carb also knows that our bodies can be healed with proper diet and exercise. It does this by providing you with unique, innovative telehealth solutions, as well as personalized healthcare. Visit lowcarbdpc.com or click the link in the show notes to learn more. Now, back to the show.
One thing, by the way, I was born in Euclid, Ohio, and my parents had secured U.S. citizenship in the 1940s, and my first language was Lithuanian. I never knew my grandfather because he died 11 years before I was born, but I knew my grandmother extremely well because I lived with her continuously until she died when I was 13 years old. At any rate, they had 3 children. The first one was Birute, who died in childhood. Then there was my Aunt Maria Valushis, that was her married name. And she was a couple of years older than my father. And then there was my father, who was born in 1913. Maybe I could mention a few words about my father and then go into the escape from Lithuania. So he clearly had a privileged upbringing. He went to the Jesuit gymnasium and had a classical education. Then he went to the military academy briefly. I think it was almost compulsory or was expected. Then he had to make a choice of study. He liked engineering and mathematics, but due to the fact that he wanted to be involved in civic affairs, he chose law. After that, he went to the University of Paris to secure a doctorate, and his specialty was industrial accidents and workers' compensation. My mother was a pianist. Her father was a pharmacist, and she was a beauty queen. She won the title of Miss Palanga, which Palanga was a resort city on the Baltic Sea. She also spoke about 5 or 6 languages. My father probably spoke 5 or 6 languages, and he knew Greek and Latin very well. He could write on the fly poetry, Latin. He once wrote me a poem when he was like 60 years old. I thought, wow. She was interesting because she was kind of the goody two-shoes. She had sworn off alcohol, and my dad had followed into a very disreputable lifestyle, so much so that my grandmother had to make a pilgrimage to Lourdes for his conversion, not only his moral conversion, but he had developed tuberculosis in the eyes. So my mother's friends would say, how come you're dating this guy? I mean, he was like the Ted Kennedy of Lithuania, you know?
Oh, right,
And
right.
she saw something. Oh, that's a wonderful picture. The lady in the middle, that's my Aunt Maria Volusius. That's her husband. My dad's on the left because he was a good-looking man. And that's my grandmother and grandfather. At any rate, at that point, my mother was dating my dad, and he proposed to her, and he was in law school in Lithuania at that time, and I doubt that he even finished 1 year, and because he was just partying and goofing off. And my mother said, listen, you need to finish law school, and then we can talk about that. He said, I'll finish it in 1 year. People are like, oh, they'll never do it in a year. That's crazy. It's a 3-year program. He finished it in 1 year. That's another thing I'd like to mention. So my father, might be interesting to the viewers, he became friends with Father Antonio Samure, who was an attaché of the Lithuanian nunciature in the 1930s. He subsequently became Cardinal Antonio Samure. He was a bishop in 1950 and cardinal in 1967. And upon his elevation to the Cardinal of Cardinals, College of Cardinals, my father wrote him a letter, and he responded in Lithuanian, referring to himself appropriately in the third person. My understanding is he was a protege of Cardinal Taviani, and he was the contents of the third secret were shared with him. The letter was framed and sitting in our dining room, but I don't know what happened to it. I'm tempted to go back to that home, which has been unoccupied now for 13 years, and get in there and see if it's still there.
Yeah. Let me ask a couple of quick questions here.
Sure.
Tell us then about the war years, how your father or grandfather, handled, relations with the Allies as well as the Axis. Which side was he on? Obviously, you just mentioned there was issues there with the Germans. So what were the war years like? And then what happened to him afterwards? Because you said you were born in Cleveland. Obviously,
I would say this. The best way to characterize that is the book of Job. 1 minute, they're living in a palace. Within 1 year, like my father's case, he went from Lancelot to assistant to the night cleaning lady and stayed that way for a long time. In early June, my father and mother were called back in 1940 from Paris, where my brother was born. And the Soviets invaded Lithuania and gave him an ultimatum. My grandfather wanted to resist. He said, I don't want to go down in history as someone who handed the communists, the Bolsheviks, the Lithuanian nation. The majority of the people in government in general said resistance is futile. And we said, okay, well, I'm going to be in exile. I'm leaving. The communists were already in the country. They gave orders not to let him go, to capture him. Luckily, there were members of the security detail which led him to the Lithuanian border. He had to walk across the river, cross the Molotov-Ribbentrop line. And this was with his family, my mother, my father, my aunt, her husband, and the child. I think my mother was with child, my brother Joseph. They crossed into Germany. And remember, this was during the Hitler-Stalin Pact, okay? So they had to call Hitler. And Hitler said, okay, you could let him in, but look, he's got to leave shortly. So they let him in. And my grandfather told my father, or asked him, what would have happened if I would have followed your advice and had the 2 Germans executed? Fate worse than death. I was told the presidents of Latvia and Estonia were killed. And as a history lesson for us, most people thought, oh, this is impossible. You're just exaggerating everything. It won't be so bad. It was so bad. 33% of the population was destroyed. There was one politician who was a brilliant man and spoke 12 languages. And he said, look, Stalin's no fool. He will recognize my brilliance. Yeah, he did. Brilliance, bullet in the head. They went from Germany, hot potato, to Switzerland, which was neutral, to Portugal, which was neutral, to Brazil, to New York City, where I believe he gave a nationwide address. He had absolute constraints put on his any kind of political activity because, Roosevelt was friends with Uncle Joe, and he had to remain quiet. They lived in a very, very modest two-family home in a lower middle-class neighborhood. They were on the second and third floors. My grandparents were in an attic, 2 rooms, no air conditioning, obviously, in the summer, and cold in the winter. And my parents were on the second floor. Again, I doubt that for the 6 people there, that there was even 1,000 square feet.
That's so shocking to me that the former president of a very large country, important country in Europe, had to flee, and he's living in an attic in Cleveland.
Can I say something? He's lucky
he
had that. What would have happened to him if he wouldn't have fled? My mother told me that the communists, to show their absolute contempt and to demoralize the people, had like a mannequin of him in an open air limo going, and they'd be beating it with sticks and clubs and fists and so on and so forth. No, it wasn't. It was very difficult. But here's something which is remarkable. My grandmother grew up in affluence, and now she's reduced to penury. And never once did they complain. Never. I never heard her complain. And she had a humiliating, difficult situation. Never once. He never complained. My father's attitude was, "Thy will be done." And he was a pious man. My mother certainly was also. But now, here's what happens. So there was a fire. My grandfather was overcome by smoke, and he died in 1944. By that time, it became pretty obvious that they weren't going back to Lithuania. So my father had to get a job. So he got a job sweeping floors at a factory. Okay, and it didn't pay that well, but he was lucky he even had that. That was not going to support the family. When the home had the fire, they moved to an industrial suburb into public housing. It was government housing built for returning GIs. So it was like a 1-story ranch, which I doubt was even 1,000 square feet, and it didn't have a basement. Small city. It's very, very modest, and they lived there for about 13 years. But then my father, while working full-time in a factory, went to law school and finished in 3 years. Think about that. You're working 40 plus hours a week and you're going to law school. That's incredible. And he had a nervous breakdown and was suicidal after that. And then in addition to that, my second brother was severely mentally retarded, severely. So that was another cross. My father eventually realized the American dream and established a law practice in 1971. He was independent. And by the early 1950s, he worked as an arbitrator for the Bureau of the Industrial Commission, and also practiced law privately. Things started going pretty well for him, and they were going to go and return to Paris so he can complete his doctorate, but that was not to be. He died at the age of 61 of a massive cerebral hemorrhage. I saw him die. I was in the hospital room, and it's almost like you could see the soul leave the body. One moment he was unconscious, but you could see it was a still living organism. One moment, stone cold, gone.
What is your family's relationship with the country these days? Does anybody reach out to you? Is there any interest in going back?
That's actually a subject for an entire broadcast. My father said he would never go back to Lithuania. All of my family members are buried in Cleveland. I would say this: the so-called fall of the Iron Curtain was a gigantic fraud. There was a book written about this by the highest-ranking defector ever from the Soviet Union by the name of Anatoly Golitsyn, New Lies for Old. He predicted that all of this would happen like in the early 80s, and he said that strategy was set in place in 1960 at a meeting of all the communist parties in the world. And he said it would be a deception to get the West to let their guard down, and then Russia would march all the way to the Atlantic. I feel that they had to do enough to make it appear credible, and they did give them a certain amount of independence. But let me tell you something. When you look at all the Lithuanian presidents since 1990, most of them were former members of the Communist Party. Some of them were KGB agents. And there was tremendous pressure on me to have my grandfather's remains returned to to Lithuania. where he could be buried next to a communist prime minister. And I said, absolutely not. He would never agree with this because that is a fraud. And what they'd be using is using that lie to perpetrate this idea that, hey, everything's different now. Let your guard down. Well, guess what? The last year or so, I haven't heard peep about that. Why? Look what they're doing. I mean, they're going to march right in and take Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia over once again, and Poland. And let's see what happens with NATO. Do you think Turkey is going to fight the Soviet Union or Russia over this? Look what happened to Germany. They integrated with East Germany, the communist country. Who was Angela Merkel? Communist from East Germany. You wonder how quickly this is going to fracture. So no, I haven't gone there personally. Many people have. I don't condemn them for it, but I haven't. My daughter has. My brother did extensively and actually wrote an article about it, what he said. And he basically said it's really fishy over there. It's like, what's going on? It's not the same. Well, I'll give you one other example real quick. So one of the first things the communists did when they took over Lithuania is they eliminated the law against divorce. My mother said, half the marriages divorced almost immediately. Remember Our Lady's words at Fatima? Many marriages are not pleasing to God. 1917. Immediately, that constraint was removed. Boom. It happened. The communism was unbelievably demoralizing, where people had to violate their consciences just to survive. It's either you die a martyr's death or you compromise. Very, very difficult to maintain a moral life under those circumstances. And the impact was profound, and I think it's still there. And now we're getting close to what Catholics believe. There was a French Jesuit, not French by history, but not by nationality, by citizenship, by the name of Oscar Laplante. Father Laplante was at John Carroll University. He ended up teaching at the Society of St. Pius X Seminary, Armada. But he was friends with our family, and he said Mass at Sacred Heart of Jesus Church in the Polish neighborhood in Cleveland, whose pastor was Father Iwanauskas. Father Szczepanski. That was the only church that offered the traditional Latin Mass up until about 1973-74. They were under intense pressure. Agents provocateurs were sent in to cause trouble and so forth. And that was kind of a magnet of all the people who were close to tradition. But Father Laplante gave him the last rites. And then there was a solemn high Latin Mass in 1974 at Father Iwanauskas' Lithuanian parish, and the deacon and subdeacon were Father Laplante and Father Iwanauskas. And when my brother requested this, he said, if I get in trouble, I'm going to sue you. So, but it was already verboten by Montini. The apostate Montini tried to, starve Catholics of their inheritance in the Blessed Sacrament. That was already forbidden starting in November 1970. In November of 1970, they made the Novus Ordo Missae mandatory. My father was an educated man. He knew a lot. So the minute he saw that, you know what he said? That's Protestantism. They turned around the table. There's going to hi everybody. And he, just from the rubrics and all that, said that is Protestantism. So we knew a gentleman who was a great Catholic gentleman and a champion of the faith by the name of Francis Hunsteiger. May he rest in peace, he and his wife. He ran two, back in the day, telephone services. One was called Echoes of 1776, and the other was called Echoes of Vatican II. And he was actually the first layman I knew who was a Sede Vacantis by the early 80s at the latest. And he said that there was a Catholic Mass still being offered at Sacred Heart Church. So we started going to Sacred Heart, and Father Szczepanski, who became our friend, many times was at our home, as was Father Laplante. And that lasted, and they put intense pressure on him to shut him down. And eventually, shortly before his retirement, I can't remember if it was 73 or 74, they shut him down. And he was going to retire and then privately offer the traditional Mass, but he died. But this was, I said, kind of a coalescing of all the people loyal to the Catholic Church. So Fran Hunsteiger's wife and some others had either a monthly or a weekly holy hour where they said the rosary for the restoration of the Mass for them so they could have access to it again. Within 4 years, it happened. Father Sanborn, who was with the SSPX then, came and gave a lecture in March of 78 in Parma, I believe, at the Elks Club Lodge, talking about the traditional Mass. It ended up on the front page of the Plain Dealer. And within a few weeks, the SSPX was coming and saying Mass at first a Holiday Inn in 1978. Then later in 78, they moved to Wallings Road School, where we were there until roughly 83. Everything was going well. I remember we had Father Cicada, Father Dolan, Father Hervé de la Tour, Father Zapp, Father Sanborn. Father Jenkins started coming roughly in August of 78, shortly after he was ordained. But in 1983 was the event. My mother was very apostolic, and she brought one of her students' families to come to the Mass. And Father Zapp comes and says, hey, we've been kicked out. We got kicked out of the SSPX for 3 reasons. They refused to say the missal, offer the Mass according to the Missal of John the 23rd. They refused to accept the Novus Ordo annulments, and they refused to accept the doubtful or fake priests coming in as society was letting in. That actually led to increase in zeal in the laity, and we formed something under the directions then of Father Jenkins called the Vexilla Regis Association, or Catholic Men for Christ the King, whose goal was to restore the kingship of Christ in the individual, the family, and society, and pursue interior development. We started off by having public rosary processions and challenging some of the nonsense of the bishops publicly, like, the nuclear freeze document, challenging blasphemous movies that the diocese would say, oh, don't do anything there, you're drawing attention to it. Like, someone's beating up his wife and say, don't do anything, you're drawing attention to it. It's not the drawing attention, it's the act of self of blasphemy, which is evil. Anyway, this organization grew. And the seminal event was 1986 in St. Gertrude's in Cincinnati, Ohio, where all the priests got the lay people from the various chapels together to launch this apostolate. Okay, so we had Dr. Rama Kumaraswamy, who was a thoracic surgeon who performed surgery on Mother Teresa. We had Tom Neese, who was the founder of
that name sounds familiar, Julius. He wrote Vatican II, right? He wrote a book on Vatican II.
Death of the Christian Tradition. It was interesting. He would be arguing about the Novus Ordo with Mother Teresa, who was, really a profound religious indifferentist. I mean, maybe she was a good person, but I'm sorry. Promoting heresy absolutely excludes you from sanctity, whether or not she was aware of it. That's pretty bad. But he had discussions with her about the Novus Ordo and the Vatican II, and she said, look, I can't argue with you. I'm not an educated woman. You have to write this with the cardinal. And the agreement would be they would publish the correspondence. But the correspondence turned out to be so embarrassing to the cardinal. I think it was called The Destruction of the Christian Tradition, that Dr. Kumaraswamy published it. He was a brilliant man. He was Harvard educated. His father was a famous Hindu scholar. He taught at Einstein Medical College, and he was also taught history at the SSPX Seminary in Richfield, Connecticut. He was there. Tom Neese was an industrialist who was praised by President Reagan on a campaign stop. We had Father Francis Fenton, Orthodox Roman Catholic movement. He was there. Father Hearn, Father Dolan, Father Jenkins, and Father Sanborn. Well, what happened at this meeting, I remember Father Sanborn said, listen, this is a disgrace that these Protestants go out and prattle their nonsense over the airwaves, and a scandal that there's nothing in Catholic. We need to establish a Catholic media. The Father Jenkins, Father Sanborn, Father Fenton met, and then it was decided that Father Sanborn would lead Catholic Men for Christ the King. And we'd have quarterly meetings in December in Detroit. And one of the first things, by the way, Father said, one of the conditions for membership, get that TV out of the house. You couldn't have the television in the house. Well, I already didn't have it. So that was a condition.
Devil's Tabernacle, as I've heard.
Yeah. But at any rate, one of our first meetings, and this was something, one of the laymen said, here's our 3 objectives. Establish a national bookstore. Well, they already had that in the New York chapel. Get a national television program, and get a bishop to ordain priests. And people saying, pie in the sky. Guess what? All of those happened. So at any rate, Dr. Kumaraswamy told us that local access was an option, where any condition of a franchise for a cable network was to offer a channel for local use and to train people in the use of the equipment. So late 86, I was talking about this to Father Jenkins, and I said, who's going to do this? You're going to do it, Julius. Well, just go ahead and do it. Well, I said, okay, whatever. So I called my brother who lived in Cleveland Heights. I said, look, you need to call Viacom and get this set up, and we're going to get the layman there. They're going to train us how to do it, and we'll start doing the programs. So there was a gentleman who was not a traditional Catholic or attending Mass at that time who helped us greatly. Eventually, he did become a traditional Catholic by the name of Hank Raska. He had previously had a video production company, but he came, and then Jim and Joe Snyder. I'll mention the names. Fran Hunsteiger was always there. Matt and Andy Zebro. Matt was Andy's son. He came there frequently. Sometimes he'd operate the switchers. So we started doing this at the studios, and we developed a bit of a network where we had laymen in the different cities. We would have the tapes copied. They were copied by a gentleman who worked tirelessly, Andre Slonik, in Saginaw, Michigan. And we'd go to Detroit, Minneapolis, Cincinnati, Chicago. Joe Sante was the person who was doing approaching the networks, the cable outlets there, and he's now Bishop Joseph Sante. At any rate, things moved. We started building a mailing list, and we got very heartfelt response. And some of the other priests were like, "Show me, I don't believe this is any good." Well, Father Kelly got very much behind it. It was head of the SSPV. So then Father Sanborn and Father Kelly started coming, and we were kind of honing our skills, so to speak, over about a 2-year period. We kept working on this, and it got to the point where we said we need to try to expand the reach and go national. So I contacted a broker for television time by the name of Bob Rosenheim. He had a complete stranglehold on the market. You couldn't get any of these religiously themed broadcasts if you didn't go through him. At any rate, we started and produced 4 programs July 1989. The first ones, we had to go to a commercial studio to have the quality, so there's an immediately greater cost and stuff, and it went pretty well, and it was over something called the Inspirational Network. We started getting calls in, and we would have 2 commercials, middle of the program and end of the program, asking for funds, and we had an 800 number, and then we had maybe 6 phone lines where people could call in, and then we would take the information and so on and so forth. And they were initially in Detroit in Father Sanborn's church, and Dr. Norm Chapin was the one who organized that and had all the people answering the phone. Eventually, they were moved to Cleveland. It went pretty well. Then we noticed that there was like a huge drop off in calls, and we thought, I can't believe our run is so short. It turned out Jim Baker was involved in an absolute scandal with, improprieties and so forth, and he was thrown in Club Fed. And when this happened, all of the local cable networks were dropping this channel. So Rosenheim said, hey, you know what? They're not even aware how good their thing is. Why don't you go to BET? I can get you a really good deal. So Black Entertainment Television at that point had like 65 million subscribers. So roughly November of '89, we got on BET 6:30 Saturday mornings. And I'll tell you, the response was very strong. If I had to guess, I would say we had an audience of 65 to 100,000. Okay. And, people would write, where's the mass center? And then they'd be calling the number 24/7, 7 days a week. And Bernice Hunsteiger would patiently and faithfully answer this. Well, just think about this. So now you've got all these calls. You've got to go to the bank. You've got to raise money. You've got to deposit the checks. You've got to distribute the tapes. You've got to store the tapes. You have to copy the tapes. My job, too, every month I had to write a monthly fundraising begging letter asking for funds. I would also sometimes make fundraising trips, and this is all volunteer basis, right? We would have the parishioners at St. Teresa Chapel help stuff the mailings each month and get them out. And things went pretty well, but we had a run for about 89 till roughly May, June of 93. It ended at that point for many reasons. I mean, I think part of it was that it became an overwhelming task, which now involved very significant risk. They started raising the cost on airtime, and there's all kinds of other complexities. So you had to make a commitment and have the infrastructure and a professional staff to deal with this, and it involved a significant outlay of funds, and it wasn't there. So we continued on in like a local access basis for quite a few years, and believe it or not, in 1998, we started, just Father Jenkins and I started making programs again in our Kent, Ohio, at a public access studio. And we kept doing that till roughly 2003. That's my recollection. I returned the tapes. They were all stored in my basement. I can't even remember who took it, either Round Top, and then somehow they ended up, I don't know, under Father Jenkins' control. I have no idea, but I do know that a ton of them were put on YouTube. And
if you don't mind, this is an episode of yourself, and somehow you can tell me after the clip, you got then, I don't know if he was running for president just yet, Pat Buchanan.
Oh, Buchanan, yeah. He was 1993 in May. Right.
An incredible topic. So you're discussing the Clinton campaign, or Clinton presidency at this point.
We had
an
two things.
Unmistakable acceleration in the ongoing moral decline has taken place since the Clinton administration has assumed power. Indeed, a new covenant has been formed between the executive office and those who openly profess and follow a lifestyle which is unalterably opposed to the law of God. This has resulted in the new paganism. I'm Julius Smetona. This is what Catholics believe. With me today to discuss the social and moral consequences of the Clinton administration are Father William Jenkins, pastor of St. Teresa of the Child Jesus Church in Parma, Ohio, publisher of the Roman Catholic magazine, Father Clarence Kelly, spiritual director of St. Joseph's Novitiate in Round Top, New York, and Pat Buchanan, syndicated columnist and commentator, co-host of CNN's Crossfire. Pat, what are your reflections on the initial period of the Clinton administration?
Oh, I think the Clinton administration, from a political standpoint, has, of course, been very much a disaster. He is lower in public approval than any president at this term in office ever since polling has begun. And I think among the reasons is that he's gotten far out of the mainstream of America so far as cultural issues, social issues, and moral issues are concerned. He's paying a tremendous price for trying to open up the Marine barracks in West Point to.
We know Pat has always given great insights, so we can just pause it there. But how did you get him on, and what was it actually like talking to him? He had already, you said, ran for president at that point.
Pat Buchanan is a
big
good
figure.
man. Yeah, I mean, he defeated George Bush in New Hampshire primary. It's a big deal. I think he had a love for the Catholic faith. I started writing to him. I sent him some of the tapes. I started writing to him, and he said, I invited him to come to Cleveland. He said, maybe you can come to Washington. So I wrote to him over a period of time, and then he said, fine, let's do it. So we packed up and went to Washington, D.C. and taped 2 episodes with him. And he even wrote me a nice card back after that. I think I met him once thereafter. I mean, he was a good man. I can't say that his programs like knocked it out of the park. And part of it is that it didn't really deal with the words of eternal life that much. If I may mention a couple today that I'm looking at that go back to my memory as being pretty strong, and I'm just talking about the hits they have on YouTube. There was La Salette that we did, early 1990s, 95,000 views. Third Secret of Fatima, I did 2002 or 2003 with Father Jenkins, and this was just when we were back to local access, 87,000 views. This was a good one. Whatever Happened to Father O'Connor? He was the Dominican who was putting the light of day on the deviant infiltration of the church in the Novus Ordo. The Dominicans, oh my goodness. He said 1950s, they had shut down a crown jewel of theirs in Mundelein because of the perversion. He has, I'm seeing 91,000 plus 5,000 views. And I'll tell you, he kind of told it like it is. He had one very perceptive remark, which may not be true. He said, listen, they're not going to come out and say, go to it. Sodomy is wonderful. He said, they're going to so confuse the issues that no one knows if it's good, if it's bad, if it's right or it's wrong. That was very true up until now, but now they're almost patting these people on the back and saying, this is perversion is wonderful. We're an open church. We're welcoming to everybody. God loves everyone. His love is unconditional. Let me say something about unconditional love. What they fail to distinguish is there is modalities of God's love. There is love as a creator, where he loves all of his creation, including Satan, but there's also the love of the friendship. Love of creation isn't going to get you to heaven. Love of friendship will get you to heaven, and that's not unconditional. You have to love him and obey his commandments. But there was a couple of, that one was a big one. So he was a good man. There was a couple of others that I thought were very significant. The Ottaviani intervention, that had quite a few hits, and I think is one of our most significant programs. And then the disaster, Vatican II, 66,000 views. Notable guests, I would say the best were Fathers Kelly, Jenkins, and Sanborn. The three of them they kind of had, how should I say, complementary qualities, where Father Kelly would sometimes just cut loose and in a very elemental way told it like it is. Father Sanborn had a kind of a brilliant perception and insight, and Father Jenkins was calm. He looked good, like an improved version of Phil Donahue, and he was a soothing, calming presence. But they did a very good job. 2 others, Father O'Connor, I think, was special. Pat Buchanan was special due to his name recognition, that he would consent to come on our program. And another one who I thought was very significant was Joe Scheidler. Joe was a great, he was the great pro-life champion. I think he was an advertising executive by profession. There are a couple of quotes which I think were great, which I think were really highlights, and they came from Father Kelly. One was, we did a program on abortion, and he said, he just interjected, he said, this country deserves to be destroyed for the crime of abortion. Then there was one where we talked about the new mass, and he said, the imposition of the new mass was the greatest act of revolution since the fall of Adam and Eve. And then he had, they were very careful about dealing with the question of the vacancy of the Holy See. In fact, the first time that this was publicly discussed was in that conference in Cincinnati in 1986, where Father Sanborn said, papal see is vacant. Bishop Waiti is a heretic. He's, word and deed, etc. Since that time, I think the theology of sede vacante became more rock solid and tight, and no longer is it the argument, well, he's a heretic and he can't be the Pope. No, it's much deeper than that and much more solid. But they were very reluctant to go into the sede vacante issue. Occasionally, they'd refer to it tangentially, which I think most people wouldn't catch. Like one time when we, on the Vatican II program, Father Kelly said that he thought that as a result of signing the documents of Vatican II, Paul VI lost his jurisdiction, lost his authority. And it's interesting, too, where, why did they do this? And I think it's similar to why Archbishop Lefebvre did this. And I'll be very frank. And he told me this once. I said, well, Father, what do you think would happen if you said the papacy is vacant? Well, vacant. People would all leave the pews. It overwhelmed them. And once he asked me, when I said, well, you got to hit this issue, he said, Julius, isn't that self-indulgence? I said, no, Father Kelly, it's the truth, But I think they were afraid of that. They handled it carefully. Archbishop Lefebvre, in my view, there is no way he thought Bishop Montini was the Pope. If he thought he was the Pope and Wojtyła was the Pope, he never would have consecrated those bishops and risked being excommunicated and the damnation of his soul. Remember what he said when he got excommunicated. Okay, he said, those who attempted to excommunicate it have long since themselves been excommunicated, meaning Wojtyła was excommunicated from the Catholic Church, referred to him as Antichrist as well.
Did you ever spend time with the Archbishop? Did you know him as well throughout your years?
I met him once in 1981 when he came to the church St. Gertrude's in Cincinnati. I met him once. That was it. I never really discussed with him much. But I'll tell you, one bishop that turned out to be extremely significant was a Bishop Alfred Mendez. And Bishop Mendez, I've got to find a quote here. It was quite interesting. He was a bishop in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, and he was quite traditionally oriented. And he knew Father Jenkins' father pretty well. And one time I got a call from someone he said, this is Bishop Mendez. I said, this is Bishop Mendez. Well, apparently either Father Jenkins or someone sent him tapes of the program, and he was very interested. So his secretary was Natalie White, who was a Jewish convert who had a PhD from Yale in theater. She loved the program as well. So back then he started giving us donations of $500 a month, and we had to keep it quiet. But he referred to the program as a miracle of broadcasting. So we were allowed to use that, but we just put down a Catholic bishop. I think the program was instrumental. I probably had 100 conversations over the phone with Bishop Mendez once he came to visit, and my family and I spent time with him. There has been some controversy with him, but he was a good man. Mm-hmm. He was a good man. And I thought that as long as he thought Wojtyła was the Pope, he might have troubles ordaining priests or consecrating a bishop. So he once asked me, what do you think of him? I said, it's impossible. He's a Pope. I said, okay. He never really spoke much about it, but he did ordain Father Joseph Greenwell and Paul Baumberger in the 1990s, like September of 1990, and he consecrated Bishop Kelly in 1993, I think in the fall of 1993. But I can say that he really showed a lot of virtue. And he was a good man. Was he affected by the Novus Ordo? Well, a little bit he was, as was Father O'Connor, and I won't go into the details, but they had the faith, and it was something heroic what he did, because he put a lot on the line by doing this, but nothing really ever happened. But that was, I think, one of the really accomplishments of the program. Some of the other things the program did, I can very briefly, it put a lot of people in the pews. They were looking for the Mass, the true Mass, and they found the true Mass via the program. And then it put people in the convent, and it put people in the seminary. So it had its run. The run ended, and it was extended for a while. So there you have it. And we'll see what happens.
It's such a unique part of traditional Catholic history, not just in the world, not just in the United States, but I think the world too, because where else was anybody really doing that sort of content, especially that early on, having the ingenuity and the idea to pioneer this area, getting onto television, making the videotapes. I mean, we have the luxury now of just talking over the internet, broadcasting it to thousands of people live, right, on YouTube, etc. So, Julius, you're a unique person in this entire movement. Your whole family history is fascinating. You've played a unique role.
I am a broom, as they said.
It's a good way to look at it.
Well, let's see. Our Saint Bernadette, she's just a broom. She's going to be used, and then she'll be put in the corner. She's done. I will not give him a lot of credence, Father Malachi Martin, but one thing he said I think is accurate. He said that he saw the third secret of Fatima, and he said, imagine the worst scenario that you can and multiply it by a factor of 10. That's where we are. Bishop Williamson said we are now in the chastisement phase of the third secret. So what I would say about that is I think we are close to Antichrist, and we are collectively like Voltaire was. He wanted a priest to confess, and they wouldn't let him near it. If we're right, there's no pope. All of these priests, Fraternity of St. Peter, not all of them, but most of them, they're not even validly ordained. Institute of Christ the King, they're all part of the Novus Ordo and recognize the acolyte of Antichrist as Pope. They can't give you the sacraments. They can't call down the blood of Christ onto the altar. It's very difficult even to get the sacraments. So what I would say, number one, more than ever, if the most important thing in the world to you is not saving your soul, you're not going to make it. Number two, don't just aim high. You have to achieve sanctity. That's what God demands. And number three, be dedicated to the rosary. Sister Lucy, in her interview with Father Fuentes in 1958, said that the rosary in the latter days would be given a special power and that there is no problem it couldn't solve. So that's what I would leave with your viewers. Look, we're in trouble. I mean, this stuff, these people are in a dream world to think, oh, Pope Leo is going to give us the Latin Mass, or we had 4 bishops come to us. Listen, these guys are heretics. They're no more bishop than I am, for heaven's sakes. You're living in a fool's paradise. So it's a very challenging time, and I would even venture to say that the United States may not exist as a country in 5 to 10 years. If you think the suffering was bad during World War II, I think it's going to be far worse, and we're going to get it this time, as is the rest of the world. So,
well, amen.
On those
to
encouraging,
all,
positive notes, I end.
Yeah. Well, you're sitting there in front of Our Lady. I am curious, is that the same statue as was in the studio all those years?
Statue that we put ourselves under her mantle for the broadcasts of what Catholics believe. I have 2 Pilgrim Virgin statues in my home. That's one of them.
Mm. So we appreciate your time today, Julius, and we hope you'll come back for that next show where we can talk about all.
I'd be delighted to do so, Stephen. Thank you for your work and your heroism. It's very important work, and we've got to fight the fight and raise the battle standard of the King.
Yeah, we keep the crusade going, just as you all did in the 80s and 90s, and even before that and after that. But we hope that our broadcast here will reach many ears, and we thank you for your time, and we hope your words will serve as an inspiration to others too, and to get that truth out. So thanks again for coming on Church and State.
Thank you, and God bless you, sir.